Why was Japan so angry in the first half of the 20th century? Just angry, going off all the time. And what does that have to do with the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Don't panic. We're going to let you know.
I'm a dad, baby.
Yeah, I'm a dad. You're a dad. We're all dads. This is Better Off Dad. You ever wonder why Japan was so angry at the beginning of the 20th century? I mean, just on a tear throughout all the first decades of the first half of the 20th century. Well, don't panic. We got you covered today.
Yeah, all right. Well, before we get into that, if you like this video and you like our channel, do all the YouTube things down there. Like, comment, subscribe, and maybe share this with somebody who likes history. Through the magic of editing.
Well done. Welcome to the Don't Panic radio show. Okay, I'm going to tell a little story
Okay.
that I promise you relates to the Japanese rise in the first half of the 20th century. And it will set the backdrop for why Japan became the Japan that we know and now love, used to not love, in the first half of the 20th century. And so today is about the opening up of Japan. But first, let's opening up of Japan in the late 19th century. So there's a story in Life, the Universe, and Everything by Douglas Adams, which is in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, which if you know us at all, you know we love this whole series.
Yeah,
maybe
just a little.
There's a story about this planet called Cricket is the name of the planet. Krikkit or ET, whatever. Cricket is the name of the planet. The planet's surrounded by a dust cloud. So if you're on this planet, you look up in the night sky. They don't look up in the night sky because there's nothing to see. It's just dark. It's just blank. Mm-hmm. They can't see past this dust cloud, right? And they have this like pastoral life, rolling hills and farming and singing songs about farming, and no songs about the night sky because that's boring, right?
Yes.
All the songs are about, their cricket landscape and how beautiful it is and how they love each other. Yeah, just a pastoral, great society, just like, picture, well, you got a picture, right? Just pastoral lifestyle. And they're all very happy. And so one day, a spaceship comes screaming out of the sky, right? Of course, nobody sees it screaming out of the sky because they never look up because there's nothing to see up there, right? But it crashes into one of their beautiful pastures. And they're like, what is this? So they go and they check it out. And of course, it killed, it's like what happened to the pilot, who knows? But they look at this spaceship and they figure out what it's for. They figure out, oh, this is a like flying machine. So they reverse engineer it, build their own flying machine, and they fly up for the first time ever in the history of their people. Somebody's now finally going up into the sky. They fly into space. They fly past the dust cloud. And for the first time ever, they just see this brilliant universe laid out before them, right? The stars and the galaxies, and they realize, wow, we're not alone in the universe. There's this whole, or we're not alone. We're not just cricket. There's this entire universe out there. And they immediately decide it has to go. Like they just can't fathom the idea of sharing.
It's too much for them.
It's just too much for them. They look out there and they're like, oh, we got to get rid of it. And they go on a massive development program. They develop wildly deadly machinery and robots and spaceships faster than anybody could fathom. Others in the galaxy are just like, what? How did they do this so fast? It takes most civilizations, millions of years or hundreds of thousands at least to figure out, interstellar space travel. These guys did it in like a year and a half, and they just went on a tear. And like the worst wars that the universe or that the galaxy had seen in forever. And it was just why they call it the Cricket Wars, right? And they had to, I won't spoil the ending, but the rest of the galaxy had to fight these robots and the people of Cricket, right? All because this one spaceship crash landed on their planet. And we do find out where the spaceship came from. We find out that whole backstory. For those of you who haven't read Life, the Universe, and everything, what are you doing with your life? You gotta
How do
go
you live
read
with
it.
yourself?
And I won't spoil the ending for you. And anyway, it wouldn't help my story, today's story at all anyway. What in the hell does this have to do with Japan in the second half of the 19th century, first half of the 20th century?
Well, I hope you have an answer.
I'm glad you asked that. Here's a map of the world. The interesting thing about this map is it shows every country is highlighted here that either did not colonize another country up until this period or had not been colonized itself up until this period. So every country that either wasn't a colonial power or had not been colonized itself. This is every country. That's Japan over there in the orange. That's Ethiopia there in the green. The British tried and famously were beaten back by the Ethiopians. Right? So Ethiopia and Japan. So Japan in what the Europeans call the age of exploration. If you're woke, call it the age of colonialism. And I mean woke in a good way and not in a bad way. From the 1400s through the 1800s, it was just all the European powers and a lot of non-European powers were just on a colonialism binge, right? And it was just like this race to see who could colonialize the most. The Japanese, and to some extent the Chinese, but we're talking about Japan today, but the Japanese saw this going on in the 1600s, and they instituted a lot of policies to try to isolate themselves. And they allowed very limited trade, mainly with the Dutch. They chose the Dutch as safe enough, although the Dutch have had their share of bad colonization, but they chose to trade with the Dutch and through just this one port. And so there were some areas where Dutch people could live and they could trade, but they weren't allowed to go into the Japanese mainland, and the Japanese citizens weren't allowed to go outside of Japan. So you're not allowed to leave Japan. You're not allowed to come to Japan. They isolated themselves thinking this will be how we can keep ourselves from being colonized, right? So that worked, sort of, and for a long time, 200 some years. The Japan, and would probably be better, this is not arranged the way you're used to looking at Japan, but just imagine, up in this case is east, down is west,
You just kind of tilt your head, you'll be fine.
Here, I'll tilt my laptop. How's that?
There you go.
Yeah, but China's over here, right? This is what Japan looked like in the mid 19th century, mid 1800s. And you'll notice, like, it's got all these little, what are all these little patchwork things here? Those are districts of Japan. And Japan had a governmental system led by shoguns, and these are shogunates. And the closest thing Europe has would be like the feudal system. Like you got your dukes and your lords and your whatever those guys are called. and you're responsible for this little bit of land. And as long as you, keep paying taxes up to whoever is in charge of your little region, they'll leave you alone. Your responsibility is to defend your little area. And every once in a while, the different areas would fight, and so there was always, over the centuries, they're all fighting with each other all the time, and they're trying to form alliances and allegiances. And this is just like a shogunate way of, kind of having their society and their system organized. But there was always a struggle, like, between the shoguns and the people who felt like an imperial way would be better. Like, throughout its history, Japan had, at various points, had one, what we might call a king or an emperor, in charge of the whole thing. And they took on godlike qualities, and just like just like you're used to. Like, you can't, when you think of a European king or European leader, they sort of get their authority from God. God said, this guy's in charge, right?
Yeah.
But with these guys, it wasn't they got their authority from God. It was they are God, right? Throughout their history. Very common. So there's always a struggle between.
It gets rid of the middleman.
Yeah, it gets rid of, exactly. Why? Yeah, just make me the God. I'll take care of things.
Yeah. I'm a generous God.
So, just like how the U.S. has had its history of states' rights versus federalism, Japan went through similar things. Shoguns versus shogun rights.
That's right.
The war for shogun rights. The war between the shogunates.
I thought Shoguниtes was a movie with Mark Wahlberg.
Maybe it was Shogun Knights. So yeah, this is kind of what it looked like when, in 1853, a gentleman by the name of, I'm going to use that term loosely, colonizer by the name of Commodore William C. Perry, and not Matthew Perry. No, it's not William, it's Matthew. Matthew C. Perry, not that Matthew Perry, the other one.
And not Thomas C. Howell either. I think anytime, for future reference, anytime we use the term gentleman on this show, we're not referring to actual gentlemen.
Right. I love that. It's a term of art for piece of shit.
Yes.
Piece of shit Commodore Matthew C. Perry. Why is it all of a sudden I'm like, is it William or Matthew? Why did I say William? Anyway, Commodore Perry. Y'all have heard of Commodore Perry. He shows up and says, "Hey, Japan, we know that over the centuries you try to be isolated and you only trade with the Dutch, but in case you haven't heard, these days you're either colonizing or being colonized. So we're here to trade. We want to trade with you." And Japan's like, "No, thanks. That's against our law. You violated our law. Now get out." And Matthew, our Commodore, our favorite gentleman, Commodore Perry. I'm just going to call him Commodore.
His mom called him Commodore. His daddy called him Commodore.
That's right. And he said, "Okay, I'll leave, but I'll be back." And he was back. He did come back with an overwhelming force. Now, between the time when he left and the time he came back, of course, the shoguns and the imperial forces and the shogun forces all had different ideas of how they should deal with this new threat. Because obviously it was a threat, right? Nobody's here to say, "Hello, I'm Commodore Perry. I'm here to trade." No, it was a threat, right? So they, had arguments over how it should be handled and everything. And he comes back and he says, "I wasn't really asking." And, he's back with much more force. And this just caused a lot of upheaval, and the shogunate just collapses, and the imperial forces end up winning. And the shogunate that had been in charge was the Tokugawa shogunate. And one of the famous things we hear about sometimes is called the Meiji Restoration. This was a nostalgic period, like the original Meiji imperial system, Emperor Meiji maybe, everybody had a lot of nostalgia. It was like make Japan great again, right? They were all like, man, back then when we had an emperor, things were great, and these shoguns,
OG Meiji.
these shoguns aren't keeping us safe. And look at that, they weren't even able to deal with this Commodore Perry, and so the shogunate just became unstable, collapsed. The imperial system then took over from there. And then Japan was like, okay, well, there's not much we can do about it right now. But we saw the map that Steve put up earlier. You either colonize or you get colonized. There's, Ethiopia, they may not, like Ethiopia was able to fight off the British that one time, but, how long is that going to last, right?
Right.
So being able to fight them off, and we've seen what they bring. We've seen their navy. What are the odds we're going to be able to fight them off? So the choices are colonize or be colonized. So
yeah,
what did Japan
they love
choose?
their navy.
For those of you that have studied the history of the war in the Pacific, what do you suppose Japan chose? So Japan, from 1854 until around the 20s, the 1920s, just went on a complete tear in terms of building. So what do? You're like, we don't have battleships. We have this, our method of fighting is mainly with, swords and bows and arrows and some flintlock, whatever's, you saw the Tom Cruise movie. And we don't have modern ways of fighting. We don't have modern weaponry. We don't have modern navy. We got nothing, right? But we need something, and we need it fast. So what did they do? They looked around the world and they said, who's good at navy? The British. The British are good at navy, and the Germans are good at navy. So they copied the British and Germans where they could. Who's good at land war? Well, the French had the most powerful land army in the world at that time. So let's copy their tactics. They had observers at the, whether they had observers on the ground, I'm not sure, but they studied the American Civil War and those tactics there and what was going on there and how they also started to militarize their entire population to say, if we're going to beat the entire colonial world trying to come in on us, if we do end up having to resist, it's going to take everybody, right? It's going to take every Japanese citizen. So they started training people. They started indoctrinating people in the idea of the emperor being a god means you have to protect that emperor at all costs. Every last Japanese person has to put their life on the line to protect that emperor. Anything less is dishonorable. Surrendering is dishonorable. If you surrender, you've dishonored your family. So they really indoctrinated the entire population in this, and of course, from an early age in the schools and everything. So basically, they did what cricket did. They did in the span of a few decades what took most countries, centuries to develop. How long did it take France to develop the most powerful land army in the world? I mean, it took from Charlemagne until, Napoleon, so.
Yeah.
And so what does colonize mean if you're Japan? Well, you start to look at your defense situation and you go, well, we're here. So it would be nice if we could surround ourselves with things that we have captured. So they went around to all these islands and, they just started, this has the timeline stuff on here. I only went through 1920. One of the interesting things that happened too is Japan took advantage of World War I. If you remember, from 1914 to 1919, there was this little war going on in Europe. And while Germany had some colonies over here, we don't usually think of Germany as a colonial power, but they had some colonies over here. Here's German New Guinea, for example. So what did the Japanese do while Germany was busy? Germany couldn't take their navy out of port, or the British would sink it, right? So they couldn't really devote a lot of resources to maintaining their colony in New Guinea. So the Japanese were just like, just kind of walked in there, you know. And people say, you know, who won World War I? And you go, well, did anybody really win? I mean, look at how many people lost. You know, British,
Yeah.
you know, France. Yeah, they got an armistice, but that's a Pyrrhic victory at best, right? Well, if you had to pick a winner of World War I, you could pick Japan, because Japan picked up a lot of territory during World War I. Yeah, so I think that probably gets us to setting the stage for how did Japan go from this isolated shogun, you know, people with those big. It's the goth kids that wear those big pants now, right? What are they called? Giant.
Yes, Gothic shoguns.
So how did they go? How'd they go from wearing those giant pants and swinging swords around and those long beards to being this powerful empire with large parts? And you remember we talked in another video about Manchuria, so you can see the Manchuria area up here. You know, so they have this occupied, all of this occupied. They walk into French Indochina. You know, just they've got all of this land now, and they're like, well, we're starting to feel a little bit more secure, right? The Soviet Navy, I think they were Soviet by this time, sent an expedition because it's like, Japan's getting a little froggy down there, right? And the Japanese Navy just wiped out the Soviet Navy. The Soviets were like, we didn't even know you had a decent Navy. What the hell, man? So they were helped out by something called a kamikaze, which was a
not just a delicious drink.
Not just a delicious drink. Also, not just people flying planes into your ships. It's a form of, actually the kamikaze planes and stuff were named after this. It's a type of storm that sort of blows through here, like really heavy. It's not a hurricane or anything, but hurricane force winds and stuff. It's how they defeated the Mongols. It's how they kept the Mongols from taking them over back in the 1200s, 1300s, and it also helped them against the Soviets. But anyway, so now we're up to 1920s Japan, post World War I. Japan's feeling its oats, right? They're like, hey man, hey Europeans, and they're trying to sell this in public relations too. They're like, hey Asians, how about Asia for Asia, instead of these white dudes coming over and trying to colonize us. We'll all be in this together, but we'll be in charge, you know, and at least Asians, if you're colonized.
Japan was fronting.
Yeah, they're fronting. They're like, if you got to be a colony, how about at least another Asian is in charge, right? So I thought that was interesting. When I first heard about this situation, this whole deal with Japan, I was listening to it on the Dan Carlin podcast, and I couldn't stop thinking about cricket. Like the entire time he was talking about it, I was like, I wonder if Douglas Adams like modeled the cricket story after what happened with Japan.
I'm almost certain he did. The man was a freaking genius.
Yeah. Right down to them copying the spaceship that had come down. And we also know, won't ruin it, no spoilers here, but we also know how they were able to develop their war fighting capabilities so quickly. Even that, like, it sort of parallels the Japanese thing, but.
So the question is, Steve, what does this have to do with being a dad?
Well, one of my kids asked me to explain to them the origins of World War II in the Pacific. And I had to go all the way back to at least 1600s. And it's like, why are you talking about the 1600s? We get there when we get there. So it's just how you can never,
when we get there.
You can never be done telling, explaining World War II, which, okay, go watch your History Channel, your documentaries about Hitler all you want, and Patton's Third Army with blah, blah, blah. It's just like, dude, there's so much more to World War II that y'all don't even know. And it goes so far back, and we ain't even done yet. So, but
and it's still going on today.
I don't claim to be an expert, though. I'm no historian. I'm only a casual fan of history, as Dan Carlin says. But I tell you what I am. I'm better off dad. Just trying to do the thing. Trying to do the thing. You know, the thing.
Just trying to do the thing.
Trying to do the better off dad. Trying to do the right thing when things are hard. And it shouldn't be this hard.
Neither should that ending. That's going in the show. Oh man,
Hilarious.